Hello, I'm Emily Bellet, the founder of Vestpod and author of You're Not Broke, You're Pre-Rich. Welcome to The Wallet and our new 7-episode miniseries where we take your most pressing questions to financial advisors. In this episode, we explore the important and often overlooked subject of death alongside financial planner Abigail Banks. While contemplating our own mortality may be uncomfortable, it is vital to prepare for the unexpected. What would happen if we were to die tomorrow? How can we make sure we protect our loved ones and safeguard our assets? And how can we provide care for aging parents in their final stages of life? Join us as we uncover the significance of estate planning and delve into crucial topics such as life insurance, trust, and the necessity of regularly updating your estate plan. I'm often asked, how do I find a mortgage broker, financial advisor, or an accountant I can trust? In a world full of chaos and noise, it can definitely be tricky to know where to turn. This is where Unbiased comes in. Unbiased is a matching service that helps to connect you with the most experienced and regulated experts. Essentially, they do the work of finding the right expert person for you. And the best bit? It's free to use. Visit unbiased.co.uk today and find your match made in money heaven. Remember that we are not certified financial advisors. Information shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.
I started researching and getting on top of my money when I became self-employed. I sorted out my pension, my investment portfolio, savings accounts, debt, all of that stuff. But then my partner told me that he has a life insurance policy through work, and I didn't think I needed one because I hope to be alive for a long time. And that doesn't seem like something I need to sort out at 25. I had spent so much time thinking about how I allocate my money, but then that made me start thinking about what would happen to all of my assets if I died tomorrow, and I realised I just had no idea what to do other than put my pension in my partner's name.
If you die without a will in the UK, your assets will be distributed according to the laws of intestacy. Your spouse, civil partner, and children usually inherit first. The government doesn't automatically take your money, and your children won't go into care. But the court may decide who takes care of them. Accessing your account may be complicated, and your ISA, for example, becomes part of your estate. If I die tomorrow, can you walk me through the steps of what will happen to my assets, my debt, and like any other financial matters?
Yes, of course. So, firstly, when you die, the first thing that's really important is to obtain a death certificate. So if you leave a will when you die, typically the executors of your estate will start, going through the process of dealing with your estate. So they will need to obtain that death certificate, and that's really important because they then need to notify, government departments such as HMRC, but also banks, insurance companies of your death. Now, when you leave a will, your executor is really responsible for getting probate. So that is giving them the legal right to deal with someone's property, money, and possessions, and really they can't make any financial plans or sell any assets until they have probate granted. So to get probate, really, they need to value the estate, so gather all of the different pieces of information, work out any inheritance tax that's due, and that will need to be paid, normally in full or part of it, before probate is granted. Now, once that's granted, the executor can then pay off any debts on the estate. So if you had a mortgage, for example, that can be paid. Any taxes that are due on the estate will be settled with HMRC, and then they will make any distributions to the ultimate beneficiaries of the estate. I think the biggest advice I have is, an executor can do this themselves, but I would always really encourage them to seek the advice of a private client solicitor. So particularly where it's a complex estate or maybe there is some contentious family issues, a solicitor can be really helpful in, taking them through the process and taking some of the burden in what is quite a difficult period for somebody.
If you want your partner to inherit the money in your bank accounts and other assets, it's important to understand the potential implications. In the UK, there's a tax called inheritance tax that may be applicable if the total value of your estate exceeds the inheritance tax threshold, known as the nil rate band. And as of today, June 2023, the threshold is £325,000 for individuals. Anything above this threshold may be subject to a 40% tax. It's important to note that if you leave your estate to a spouse or civil partner, then it will not be subject to inheritance tax. For non-married couple, inheritance tax may apply. And if you transfer your money and assets to your partner during your lifetime as a gift, it may be subject to inheritance tax rules. Gifts made within 7 years of your death are potentially subject to inheritance tax, especially if the total value of the gifts exceeds the inheritance tax threshold. Deathbed gifting is also subject to the 7-year rule. However, there are certain exemptions and allowances for gifting, such as the annual exemption and the spouse civil partner exemption. If we take a step back, you talked about estate, and I'm thinking about maybe estate planning, and that's part of your role as an advisor. What is an estate plan? How can I prepare one, revisit, update, and what sort of life events should prompt a review?
For me, an estate plan is really simply put, it's just saying, how you want your estate to be dealt with on your death. So ultimately, who do you want to benefit from your estate? And that's really going to involve putting a will in place, but also a letter of wishes. So a letter of wishes goes alongside the will and really goes into more detail. So for example, if you had a particular painting that you wanted to go to a particular person, you can stipulate that in your letter of wishes. Now, life happens, it changes. So it's really important to revisit these documents. And I'd say, the obvious one is a relationship breakdown. So funnily enough, if you divorce somebody, your will isn't revoked, but it stays in place and it's valid, but your ex-spouse cannot benefit from the will. If you get married, your will is actually revoked unless it's made in anticipation of that marriage. So for couples who are getting married, it's really important that they review their wills at that point because they may be revoked on marriage. Now, having children, again, really important. So in a will, you will set out the guardian, so who you want to, be responsible for children if they're under 18 when you die. And I think last one for me, it's really important is, if you're an unmarried couple and you're buying a first home together, quite often it will be done on a tenants in common basis. So it may be 50-50, but it may be a different proportion depending on how much money each party puts into the property. Now, if you don't have a will in place, you will die intestate. And then perhaps your share of the property will not go to your partner if it's a tenants in common. So it's really important you have that will in place to say, I want my share of the property to go to my partner, not my family, if I die.
And the process of, writing a will with a solicitor, I talk about that in another episode of the podcast, but it's quite a stressful thing. I mean, I was with my husband, the kids were in their bedroom sleeping, and we talk about the different options. So this is really stressful. How do you help your clients navigate the process, and maybe what are the key elements for anyone who are thinking about, this estate plan, my will, what is sort of a checklist for them?
Take stock of your assets. So if you have quite simple assets, perhaps a really simple will is all you need. The biggest one for me is children, as you've mentioned. Ultimately, you want to make sure that you have somebody that you trust as a guardian in that will who will take over, looking after your children if you and your husband are no longer with us. And it may be that if you have some slight complex assets, such as a business, you might need a more complex will. So you may want to consider the use of a discretionary trust, for example, in your will for business assets due to the tax reliefs that are available. So I think talking to a solicitor is so helpful, just looking at the different options that are available to you and make sure that you have, the right will for you, because it's not a one size fits all. In my experience.
Yeah, and in my experience, it's not necessarily very expensive. I don't think I would go on the internet and just, do one off the shelf or, buy one, but actually sit with someone, because there's so many options and you don't think about all these different options. Another question for me is, talking about death is difficult, but talking about inheritance is really tricky.
Yeah.
How do you start the conversation with with your kids maybe, or with your parents also? How do we have these like intergenerational conversations? Because if you start talking about that with your parents, they feel like, yeah, but I'm not dead yet. What do you want from me? So how do you do that with your clients? How do you approach the conversation?
No, absolutely. It reminds me of Succession, the series that's just been on HBO. It's money can be a taboo subject, but I think I'd really suggest just approaching it with curiosity rather than being too investigative with your line of inquiry. So I listened to a podcast last week and they were talking about wills. Do you have one in place? Would you be comfortable sharing it with me? And I think it's just having kind of small step open discussions and just opening that door, because particularly in my experience, older clients, sometimes they just don't want to talk about their money or estate with their children. They just have I don't know what it is, a generational thing. They just don't want to discuss it. But it's just approaching it in the right manner. And really, you're just going into it wondering what's in place already and if any planning needs to be done to make it easier for, the children when something ultimately happens to their parents. Children is an interesting point as well. So particularly for, people with a large estate, often it's getting the children used to the family finances and ultimately the money they're going to inherit, being respectful of that and being used to taking, professional guidance and advice. I think involving them as early as possible is really helpful because it starts the financial education piece for them.
Yeah, and we know that is super important to talk about money with kids, involve them very early on, and that actually makes a big difference in the long term, and they end up having more money usually in retirement. Yeah. There's a lot of statistics around that. What are some considerations for choosing an executor or trustee to oversee your estate?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is you want to choose somebody who you trust to follow your wishes. And I think it's got to be, in my experience, someone who's quite organised, particularly with an executor. If it's a complex estate, there's, multiple investment products. They're going to have to spend some time speaking to different providers, and it can be quite a lengthy admin-focused period. So having that organisation is really important. I think someone who understands the family dynamic is helpful. So, families are never straightforward. If there's perhaps some contentious issues there, them having an understanding of the family and how to approach certain conversations is very, very helpful in my experience.
And let's say if you have, young children and something happens to you, but you need to receive some care, how can you ensure like your care, financial well-being in the event of, death or long-term care?
Yeah, exactly. So, the death is, for me, the immediate thing is having that will in place. So particularly if it prevents against, husband and wife dying at the same time, the guardians are in that will. I think something as well alongside that is perhaps life cover or protection products. So, for many people, they want to leave a legacy behind. But if you are young parents, you may have mortgages, for example. So having life cover in place that can provide a lump sum to cover a debt, for example, or perhaps something we call a family income benefit. It provides a tax-free income on first death. So the surviving spouse, can, keep that income coming in for a set period of time, and they don't need to worry about perhaps going back to work or, going back to work if they weren't the main breadwinner at home. So they can, just remove that financial stress in an already very stressful time. Long-term care was another point you mentioned.
Life insurance in the UK provides money to your loved ones when you pass away. How it works is that you pay a monthly or annual premium for the coverage, and you choose the lump sum amount, so the sum assured, that your beneficiaries will receive. Modern-day life cover premiums are very different to pension contributions and do not receive tax relief. It's important to consider placing life insurance policies into trust, as the lump sum could potentially be subject to inheritance tax if a trust structure is not in place. If you pass away after paying only a few years of premiums, the full lump sum will still be paid out to your beneficiaries regardless of how much you have paid in premiums. Modern life policies do not build up a monetary value, therefore when the policy comes to the end of its term, there will be no surrender value or refund of premiums paid. This is why life insurance can be a valuable financial tool, as it offers a level of financial security and protection for your loved ones. However, it's important to review the specific terms and conditions of your life insurance policy to understand any exceptions or limitations that may apply. Some policies may have exclusions for certain causes of death. When should you take life insurance?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for me, there's different motivations for life cover. So the natural one is to cover a liability or a debt. So if you have an outstanding mortgage on your property, you might take life cover. So if one of you dies, if you own it, jointly with somebody else, that debt is covered. They don't need to worry about selling the property, because they can't afford the mortgage anymore. It may be that you do a lump sum to leave behind as a legacy. So, for example, I have had clients say, I want to cover university costs when the time comes for grandchildren or children. So we'll set up like a lump sum policy that pays out a tax-free lump sum, which can then be used to cover those, education costs or perhaps first house purchase.
And now if we just talk about the different maybe types of trusts and how they can be used to achieve specific estate planning goals.
Yes, the trusts are really complex, and there's many different types of trusts. And so I'd always recommend, seeking legal advice if you are considering a trust arrangement. But, you can set up trusts during your lifetime by making gifts into them. So the tax treatment differs depending on the type of trust. So I won't go into that now. But broadly, I think there's two types of trust. So there's what we call a bare or an absolute trust. And this is where you name the beneficiary. So they have an absolute right to that capital or income, and they can usually access that capital at 18. So for some people, it's absolutely fine if grandparents are setting up for school fees, because it's likely the money is going to be completely spent by age 18. Some say, rightly so, don't really trust my child to have a lump sum at 18 because don't want them to go and spend it on, a big car. They want it to be used sensibly. So there's another type of trust called a discretionary trust. And this is where there's a class of beneficiaries. So you'd say, I would like my children or grandchildren to benefit from the trust. But because there isn't a named beneficiary, it's really at the discretion of the trustees who benefits from the trust within that class and when and in what capacity. So you have much more flexibility and control over the assets in a discretionary trust, that the taxation is very different of the two. So you just need to be mindful of that when choosing the right option for you. You can also set up a trust in a will. So, for example, in the will, if you have minor children, you can set up a trust that comes into effect on death. So if you have children under the age of 18, you can leave assets to them in the trust as part of your will.
If we just go back to care, I think it's a conversation that we've had in the community, like coming up quite often, is how can we start discussing care for aging parents at the end of their life? Because I feel women are in this like sandwich, generation or position where they start taking care of their kids and start saving for their kids and not necessarily for themselves. And at the same time, they see their parents becoming older, and you see that it's going to become at some point expensive and it's going to become a big responsibility. So how do you start the conversations and put things in place that, could help you a little bit over the short to the long term?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think the first thing I'd say, it's always really important to talk about lasting power of attorney with not just with elderly parents, I think especially even, partners as well. Yeah. So this effectively, if somebody loses mental capacity, you are able to deal with their financial affairs, but also make decisions with respect to their health as well and the kind of treatment that they receive. So it's really important to put these in place whilst the person has mental capacity, as once they don't have mental capacity, it's not possible to have a lasting power of attorney. So you need to apply to the courts for a deputyship order. So if everything is in one person's name, it's not a joint account. If there isn't a lasting power of attorney in place, that person cannot access those bank accounts until they have a deputyship order. Because you have to go through the courts for that, it can take months, and it's also more expensive typically. Whereas if you have that lasting power of attorney, you can access them immediately. So you hope that you never need to use them, but it's really good planning, just because you never know when something might happen and somebody lose capacity. So I think it's incredibly good planning. And then for the elderly parents, it just gives them an option to, be involved in the discussion. Who do they want to be their attorney? It's very similar to an executor. They'll want people that they trust to do the right thing by them and really respect their wishes. And part of that is having a really open discussion about care, what's important to them and understanding their wishes. For many people I'm finding at the moment, they want to stay in their own home and have care. And what that looks like really depends on the person. It could just be having some more help around the home, such as a gardener, for example, if they've got a really large garden. Or perhaps they're a bit lonely, so they may just want some more support from friends and family, all the way to having a live-in carer, for example, if they do have more requirements with mobility help, for example. So it's just really, again, starting that conversation and just asking that person, what does care look like to you, and what do you want me to consider now and in the future?
So difficult to have these conversations. But hopefully, really having a checklist and some questions, or doing it, probably doing it with an advisor or with someone, or with other family members can be helpful.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I think it's just saying, I want to make sure I'm looking after you the best I can and doing the right for you. So understanding what's important to you will help me do the best for you. And I think it's just making sure making it clear you've got their best interests at heart.
Yeah. And just a final question, and I know it's for those of you who are listening and who feel like, I haven't done any of this, don't worry. I've done that very recently, and also because I'm the founder of Vestpod and I spend my life, talking to people about money. So I know it's a little bit of a learning curve. But Abby, what is the most common mistake or problem, challenge when it comes to estate planning?
Yes, I was thinking about this. So I really think it's personally not acting or having a plan in place. And the thing with estate planning is it often comes out of nowhere. You cannot predict when someone is going to die, unfortunately. So it's just being as prepared as you can and having all of these discussions and structures in place, and it will genuinely make your the process you go through, I think, much easier in what is already a very difficult time. So just starting those conversations and being prepared is my best advice.
And Abby, even before I did my will, I remember years and years ago, one of the first things I did with my money was to update my pension beneficiaries. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it's quite an easy thing to do, but we tend to completely forget about it.
Absolutely. I think it's my number one prompt to clients, to be honest. So interestingly, most pension structures do not form part of your estate. So they do not come under the terms of your will. And I think this is not commonly known actually by many people putting a will in place. So it's really important you have those expression of wish forms in place, as it ultimately tells the pension trustees who you want to benefit from your pension assets. Now, what we typically say to clients is, put your spouse or your partner on there as a major beneficiary. But I also think it's really important to name other people on there. So, for example, children in a very small percentage. And it protects against the event that if you were both to die simultaneously, the pension trustees know that, you would want the monies to then pass to the children. So it's a real call to action, I'd say, for people to just check their nominations. And as you said, Emily, it's very easy to update them, often online with the pension provider.
What about pensions when you die? When it comes to pensions in the UK, here's what happens when you die. With your state pension, if you pass away, your state pension will normally stop being paid when you die, depending on the amount of national insurance contributions a married couple made. And when they reach state pension age, it may be possible for a spouse or civil partner to inherit some of your state pension. This is taxable on the recipient. If you have a defined benefit pension, for example, final salary pension, will pay out a set percentage of guaranteed income to the surviving spouse or civil partner for the remainder of their lifetime. This is usually between 50 to 66%. It's not possible for death benefits to be passed to unmarried partners or adult children. The pension income is taxable as income on the recipient. And if you have a defined contribution pension, if you have a pension through work or personal pension, there are 3 options for your nominated beneficiary. The first one, return of fund as a lump sum. Your beneficiaries will receive a cash lump sum based on the value of your pension fund. This is tax-free lump sum if you die before the age of 75. After age 75, the lump sum will be subject to tax at the beneficiary's marginal rate of income tax. You can also get an annuity. The beneficiary can buy a dependent annuity. Again, the tax position is the same depending on whether you die pre or post 75. Finally, a drawdown is your last option. Your beneficiary can leave the fund invested and take withdrawals as and when they require. The tax position of the withdrawals is usually based on whether you die pre or post 75. It's always best to review your specific pension plan and consider seeking advice from a financial advisor or pension specialist for more information. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Wallet. We recognize that discussing money can sometimes be seen as taboo, and we believe in the power of sharing knowledge with friends as a meaningful way to give back. Make sure you click and follow The Wallet wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss episode 2 launching next Thursday. For the Love of Money, where we talk about money and relationships. If you enjoy our show, we would greatly appreciate your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Lastly, make sure you mark your calendars for upcoming live webinar on financial advice on July 20th, where we'll explore the ins and outs of working with a trusted advisor. You can sign up for free now via the show notes or on Vestpod.com.